So, about Lycoris Recoil. Basically, I thought it was fine. Extremely good action sequences, quite strong visual execution, terrific characters, thematically weak, but ultimately serviceable, overarching plot. It's fine. So, because all our other scripts have extremely stagnated, I'm just gonna run down some of Lycoris high and low points. Lycoris caught our attention because of someone tweeting a cool action sequence clip. A pretty cool gunfight where a high school anime girl dodges a bullet to the face and then beats up a bunch of guys with rubber bullets. We were immediately curious. Then we watched it and were kinda shocked to find that not only were the action sequences consistently excellent, but that the two lead characters and their banter was fun to watch, and the voice acting and production was really strong, and the show had a really compelling opening sequence about how Tokyo is ostensibly peaceful and happy, because child soldiers are keeping the streets clean of crime. If I had to describe that first scene, I'd say it feels like the opening to a Love Live season, but with that tone, underscoring extrajudicial killing. And given our particular offbeat sense of edgy humor, all us in this brain ate that shit up. It's a really good opening pitch that implies something much more subversive and satirical than what follows. We'll get to that. So then the plot happens. Takina Inoue is a gun girl who's been fired from gun girls who use gun to kill criminals for using too much gun to kill too many criminals. So she's reassigned to Gun Girl Cafe, where she meets Chisato Nishigiki, the best gun girl of all time, who is morally opposed to murder, and for this reason is sort of the problem child gun girl who they seemingly really want to get rid of, but can't because she is basically unkillable due to her superhuman bullet dodging abilities, and thus is the best gun girl. They help stop some crime things and be subtextually gay together while working at the Gun Girl Cafe. Hijinks ensue, crime also ensues, drama happens. Lycoris Recoil is a weird fucking show, but not because anything it does is all that weird on its own. In fact, this is a pretty predictable anime composed of some pretty regular tropes, and most of the time we see the major plot twists coming about an episode or two ahead of when they happen. But it's specifically weird because of its tonal whiplash. And it's a very strange and specific kind of tonal whiplash that isn't egregious or even all that negatively impactful, but that I think is weirdly implicit, if that's the right word. Lycoris is a guns with girls anime, or at least half of it is. And guns with girls anime, from what I've gathered, not having watched many of them, generally deal with some fairly fucked up subject matter. Reasonably so, as the concept of child soldiers is, inherently fucked up. I'd argue that the concept of soldiers in general is pretty inherently fucked up, but sure, child soldiers are definitely more fucked up. I've seen at least an episode of Noir, and that series has its cool gunfights and its cool girl, but it's fairly clear from the outset that this child is killing people, and that is kind of fucked up, even if justified given that the people in question are also trying to kill the child. Lycoris, meanwhile, doesn't tend to acknowledge the fucked upness of its premise, at least not openly, except when it kinda does, and then even then it just sorta pretends it didn't. Chief among the not acknowledged is the delightful, comically macabre opening.
日本人は規範意識が高くて優しくて温厚。法治国家日本。首都東京には危険などない。存在していたことも許さない。決して決して決してきれいにする。危険はもともとなかった。
This is perhaps one of the most brilliant starts I've ever seen to a show that didn't happen. Or, well, half happened, as I say. This feels like the start of asking some serious questions, like, what is the price of peace? Is it worth taking away personal freedoms if all the people who ultimately don't disturb society are happy and secure in the end? Is fascism good so long as they're isn't violence? That's a trick question. Fascism is always violent. It's inherent to the ideology that even a quote-unquote peaceful fascist society is committing violence against its citizens. Anyway, regardless of one's political leanings, like even if they're not a communist or an anarchist or a generic egalitarian pile of whatever else trash like I am, a good writer's answers to those questions can easily inform an entire series, and many already have, but Lycoris isn't really interested in that, or at least the director, Shingo Adachi, isn't. And I'm not saying that because I think Lycoris had some moral responsibility to explore this topic. I don't think it did. I'm just saying that as a critic that political statements and stories, even if I might disagree with them, make stories more interesting. Not necessarily good, mind, but it does make it more interesting. And I can imagine that whatever the original scripts for Lycoris were, they were probably at least a little bit more focused on the politics of the premise than the series we ultimately got. Shingo Adachi has detailed in interviews how the original concept for the series was as something a lot darker and a lot more serious, before he toned it down to be a lot sillier and lighter and just have a lot more focus on comedy. The end result of this is that Lycoris feels like two different shows awkwardly jerry-rigged together, and while there's merits to combining dark material with comedy elements, the script doesn't quite have the finesse to successfully pull it off. It comes close, but it doesn't quite get there. Adachi is most certainly no slouch as a director or a screenwriter. From what I've seen in the translated interview answers, he's been very intent on creating a show that's both funny and entertaining. As he said, he wanted to make a show that makes people laugh every 5 minutes, and I think whatever else there is to say about Lycoris, it is an amusing show. It's even generally a good show. The relationship dynamic between Chisato and Takina is perfectly executed. They are perfect. They are just good characters that complement each other perfectly. They're good. All the other characters are good too, in general, I think. I don't know. I don't have a lot to say about them. I just like them. I think the cafe stuff is fine. It's perfectly fine on a pacing level to have these silly moments where the series establishes more about our leads' personalities and their relationships and the reasons why we should care about them while they're fighting. I'm kind of coming around on Ruby doing a similar thing, albeit less good. I'm writing a video about Ruby that isn't done and needs more time, but I am going to talk about it. It's also quite clear, seeing the translated information from the interviews, that the quality of the action scenes are due to some spectacular project management by Adachi, and specifically his hands-off approach to direction as detailed by Callum May of the Canepa Effect here.
While Adachi is a character designer and animator himself, he gave basically no instructions, leaving Imagi to make what they thought was best. In fact, Adachi didn't micromanage any part of the animation of the show. Aware of the difficulties with TV production schedules, he didn't want to turn himself into a bottleneck, so he handed those duties off to his assistant director and erased the step where the director checks every layout before they go through. He assembled this team because he trusted them, and in this case, it more than worked out.
Given also how Adachi considered the feasibility of realizing Chisato's bullet time powers in animation, it's quite clear that he has a strong understanding of the strengths and limits of modern anime production, and knew how to assemble a team and organize a production that could produce optimal results under those conditions while maintaining consistent quality. And it feels like that's getting rarer and rarer. Discounting Call of the Night, Lycoris was most certainly the best-looking show I saw this season, even if not the best, or even the second best. And that's something to be commended. So, having comedy scenes, having some darker subject matter, having serious stuff, having great action, all that stuff is good. But where I think the series falters somewhat is that it's not too often willing to actually address the implications of its darker subject matter, or rather it presents that subject matter, name-checks it, and then proceeds to sweep it under the rug and do nothing much with it whatsoever. I've already mentioned the opening scene, which was pointed out by a lot of reviewers besides myself as being something that is interesting and spooky and weird. And to an audience of people who live in a country where there's incidents of gun violence perpetrated by both the state and the populace so often that they're not even news anymore, this comes off as definitely something that should be at least said something about. The situation is obviously completely different in Japan, where guns are more tightly regulated and violence seldom, if ever, occurs out in the open, so this scene definitely has to hit different over there. My point being, overall, is just that Lycoris has basically nothing to say about its premise of deep state murder organization doing extrajudicial murder with children ostensibly to protect the peace, and while it's hardly immoral for that, it's just less interesting. There are a couple of episodes where Majima, a fantastic character by the way, cool design, cool personality, cool superpower, great voice acting, cool character in general, has this whole wild plan to give a lot of regular people guns and let them run wild to expose the Lycoris child soldiers and watch the organization's house of cards come crumbling down all around. I think this is absolutely ridiculous, and it is, intentionally so. It is also a bit weird from this side of the pond, considering that all Majima needed to do to evaluate how good an idea this was look to the American news cycle, but whatever. Anyway, Majima raises all these questions that the opening implies the series would be about, enough that he sounds kinda reasonable and it's gotten across why he thinks it's the right idea, but it's not taken seriously enough that there's any sense that the story thinks he might be correct in some way, or cares about the implications of his beliefs. It's just, yeah, it sure is fucked up that this child soldier organization can just disappear people, but also I'm still the villain, so there you have it. I guess the child soldier organization is the best available side to take. Oh well. The execution of Majima's plan does show some promise as a plot point, which I did enjoy, even if, having seen the recently translated detail from Adachi's interview that he didn't want the story to be concerned with the morality of the conflicting sides, I knew the story was not going to deal with the consequences of these events in any majorly meaningful or interesting way. But sure, it sure milked that plot point while it lasted. I counted a total of 3 on-screen deaths. 3 entire deaths. That's less people than Takina killed at the start of the show. Amazing. But still, this scene sure does hit, even knowing it's not going to have any consequences. And also, this fight is really good, with Chisato being put in the dark in the tower along with Majima, and deprived of her bullet sight advantage, she faces off against him and his sonar abilities in an environment where he has the upper hand, and she's just panicked and confused and shooting randomly while he's toying with her, and it's so cool. It honestly reminds me of that one bit in the Skyfall opening sequence where Bond is shooting his own shadows. It's such a similarly cinematic, memorable sequence, making Majima feel like a real threat to Chisato, someone who seemed basically invincible this whole time, and then it's paid off so well when Takina busts in, and it's like, yeah, next episode, we're gonna get more of this cool nonsense as they try to clean up the aftermath of Majima exposing the DA and Lycoris and all that chaos. And then the next episode, Kurumi just hacks into all the screens, Persona 5 style, and tells everyone it was all a silly joke. Yeah, that was about what I expected. The series does acknowledge in its finale that some of the populace are suspicious still, so it's not like there can't be consequences if a second season is greenlit. They can definitely make it come around and bite DA in the ass if it turns out that covering up the truth isn't so easy as they'd hope. Nonetheless, I do believe that the series doesn't give nearly enough weight to the consequences in the season that we do have. Like, there were deaths, and there were witnesses, and DA might just make the witnesses disappear off screen and disappear the evidence, but there's still all the guns and all the other stuff, but I don't really care about all that. My biggest issue is mostly just that this resolution, even with these dangling threads, is kind of boring. Cause they could have done something cooler with it. Imagine a season 2 of Lycoris Recoil, where the cafe's gone and DA's disbanded and most of the Lycoris are also dead, and the boy Lycoris are in charge of the city now, and the surviving Lycoris have to band together in hiding, and them without the support of the DA organization while Chisato's heart clock is ticking down, and all these other places the story could go with that, like John Wick 3, you know? And that's really just one example of how this series could have been so much more bold. Adachi said he wanted the audience to focus more on the cafe antics over the morality of the conflict, and I do think that the cafe stuff works on a narrative level. It's Chisato's reason for living and all. That works. That's cool. But I couldn't shake the impression watching Lycoris that Adachi and company probably felt like the darker stuff of the story needed to be restrained in order to not infringe upon the wacky comedy side of the series. And I really don't think that's true. It's entirely possible, if you're good enough with finessing a tone, to do a narrative that does both. And the character arcs do both. Mostly. Kind of. Like, it's so weird that the wider plot arc feels weak and cheap in places, while the character narrative is, in a lot of places, perfectly pitched and directed and everything. The fight scenes between Chisato and Majima are excellent. I've already mentioned the first one earlier, but in both their episode 11 fight and their episode 13 fight, there's a visceral physicality to their struggle that feels authentic. And it's so perfect for both of them, Majima's aggressive attitude and Chisato's cheerful temperament combined with the quiet darkness in her. That cold, suave sass she puts off to her enemies, and the conversation that they have when Majima just suddenly, unexpectedly, hilariously stops their fight to pass Chisato a soda, upon noticing her heart's on the way to giving out. And then the thing he says about how he doesn't really have an ideology so much, more that he just sides with the weak and all that. Whatever I said about Lycoris's lack of interest in the ethics of the sides involved, I think that's cool. It's just pretty strong characterization. That's really what makes a good villain, isn't it? Someone who's not just a villain for the sake of it, but someone who's got a spine and things to like about them as a person, and some reasons that you can kind of get about why they are how they are. I think I'll probably appreciate Majima's character a lot more on a rewatch, because, like, yeah, he's actually cool. His dialogue is fun, he's a fun character, he's a cool foil, he's alright. What else? I was going to a lot more heavily criticize how fucked up episode 9 is, and how little it's acknowledged how fucked up it is. But then they actually did acknowledge the fucked upness in episode 12, and that part is actually really good. Like, Chisato and Takina and Yoshi, and Yoshi's henchwoman, and the whole shebang. It's really damn good. Chisato and Takina, as I said, are really damn good. It just really sells quite well how this sicko is, well, the kind of disgusting man who saves a dying child's life so that she can grow up to be a murderer and then tries to expedite her death when she refuses to do murders. Chisato's complicated feelings here are really well showcased, like her dad, or the guy who she thinks of as her dad, saying to her face, "Kill me or die," and then she does shoot him, and it's this entire emotional scene of just Chisato wrestling with and weighing her ideals against her life and choosing her ideals. But then Mika comes along in the next episode and kills Yoshi and takes the mechanical heart in him, but then doesn't tell Chisato this to protect her. And that's just kind of a huge, emotionally impactful plot point that works alongside Chisato and Takina having an island resort date, and then also Chisato and Takina doing the ending of Princess Principal. Princess Principal is an extremely good show, and if I had to tell anyone to watch only one of these shows, I'd pick that one. But Lycorico is okay. Like I said, I think it's just not quite bold enough. I also think its restrained attitude is intentional. It's very much an anime that wanted to reach a broad audience with a story that didn't challenge viewers too much. Adachi wanted a lighthearted show with gun girls in it, and it's clear that the rest of the creatives on the team went along with that, so that's just what the show is. The MCU take on the guns with girls genre, I guess. Entertaining, competent execution, likable characters, cool action, bland arc story with middling centrism, some interesting ideas that it doesn't fully follow through on. Yes, you'll have a good time with this show. Yes, even I had a good time with this show. My headmates had a good time seeing this show. I think it's good. I even think it's great. I just think it could have done a bit more to be more of the sum of its parts. To summarize, Lycoris Recoil's greatest contribution to the world is, most likely, Shisetaki, and the incoming wealth of good Yuri art for my headmates to fawn and be horny over for at least another month or so. I should note, it sounds like Asura has written some pretty cool other things, including one particularly cool-sounding Yuri/Gun Girls light novel titled Vanilla, that kinda sounds like it's everything I would have liked Lycoris to be more of. And I'd like to be able to read that someday. Someone we follow on Twitter wrote a review of that like 5 years ago. I'll be linking that below. Hopefully that, and Asura's other probably cool writings, can get translated now that Lycoris might make people more interested in that. And hopefully, if Lycoris gets a second season, it takes more creative risks, and does other cool things. Hopefully, other things. Also, Adachi and everyone else working on Lycoris are all plainly very talented folks. And, well, I'd hope that any other cool shows they end up working on are also at least quite cool, even if they're also flawed and weird. They've made Lycoris interesting, at the least, and having gone into it, knowing nothing, and having no expectations, I'm happy it was cool and interesting. Hello again, everyone. So, this is future Audrey, talking further, like a couple days in the future. I was thinking about the whole not acknowledging terrorism point, and I think actually that that's just not what the series is about. And criticizing it for not being the thing it was, well, not acknowledging much of what it is maybe a bit silly. Lycoris gestures at those ideas and all and everything, and that's just what it got criticized for, because media criticism in this era is kind of way too focused on finding problematic things to point at in media, like kind of similarly how to say the Call of the Night will get criticized for its fan service, while the reviewers doing so will ignore its themes of the ennui of daily life and the liberating feeling of breaking free of your daily routine. And that ticks me off a little bit, even if I acknowledge that people are not obligated to watch anything they're uncomfortable with just because it's about something. So, because that ticks me off a little bit, I feel like it would be hypocritical of me for me to not mention that Lycoris is about other things. So yeah, Lycoris may have suggested those ideas that I spoke of, or at the least appeared to when establishing its series premise, and I think that its disinterest in those ideas, if that's something that puts you off, then yeah, that's fair. And I stand by most of what I said. I do think that Lycoris is ultimately a very just slightly left-of-center show that doesn't interrogate the ethics of the conflicts, but that's kind of true of most media that involve super special fighter people protecting the peace. And also, it's not as if that reading is absolute and immutable, even for mainstream superhero films, so yeah, it's true, but it's not special. When I stopped and thought about it for a second after seeing a tweet from a mutual saying that critics calling Lycoris out for its non-discussion of terrorism and civil freedoms needed media literacy, I realized that, yeah, there are other themes, it's kinda said by Mika in the last episode. The whole thing about how the older generation ought to acknowledge their sin and get out of the way of the youth. And yeah, that's a theme that is there. So, Do I have anything to say about this theme? Not really. I've noticed that it's there now, I guess. I guess it's a good theme, and in hindsight, it was probably the good thing about the series that may have been the reason I cared about it and Chisato and all. I don't have any issue with it as a choice. I also don't really have any super strong feelings about how the story handled it. If someone else who has more to say about the series in some other piece wants to say more, then, well, I hope whoever does that has fun analyzing the series through that lens. But also, speaking of the creative risks I spoke of earlier, there were some hella ones. And I now can say this definitely because of a post on Sakuga blog that came out while I was procrastinating on this video. And in that post by Kevin Yuyukawa of Sakuga blog, it was revealed to me that I cannot deny that Lycoris production was a tremendous triumph over a terrible situation. This show, by all rights, should not have been as good as it was because Aniplex fucking blows, but it came together because sheesh. Well, yeah, I said that everybody working on this show, was talented. Boy, are they. Talented, and dedicated, and brilliant, all of them. Lycoris Recoil had a production as aggrieved as all anime productions are, and its animation was saved from suffering the fate of Shafty Ruby by many, many people, including Shingo Adachi's wife. Obviously, other people besides Haruko Izuka put in the work to make Lycoris exist and not suck, but if nothing else, just remember this. Lycoris Recoil needed to be saved by its director's wife because Aniplex fucking blows. I am disappointed, somewhat, as an edge lady, that apparently Asura's 90s hentai OVA bullshit pitch was not accepted. I very much would like to see Asura's other work be translated, and I do especially want to read Vanilla, and also, yeah, look, I don't know, this post made me possibly weep a little, and you should read it, even if you hated Lycoris. The good things in anime that are fought for need to be known, generally. So, yeah, I'm gonna link that in the description and in the comments. Read that, please. Anyways, that's enough words for me to say even more of about absolutely nothing. I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk for whatever reason that you did. Anyway, now for the patron names. Bree, Dorian Newlin, Eliza Tantavi, Hikari no Yume, Nishwert, Sally, Scimitar, Sven Lupov, and Tis. And thank you all for watching. If any of you would like to donate to our Patreon, and that would be appreciated very much because we actually do need it, that would be very helpful and appreciated. Alright, bye.